Captain Marcus Daniels had always believed that airports were like second homes to him. For over 15 years, he had walked through terminals filled with rushing travelers, security announcements, and the smell of fresh coffee shops. As a senior pilot, he was respected by his colleagues, loved by his passengers, and trusted by the airline. Flying was not just his job. It was his passion, his identity, and his way of giving people comfort in the skies. On that bright morning, Marcus arrived at the airport as usual, carrying his neat black pilot's uniform, polished shoes, and the confident stride of someone who had flown across continents more times than he could count. In his hand was his official airline bag, the same kind of bag all captains carried, filled with flight plans, documents, and personal essentials. Around his neck hung his badge, shining proudly with his title, Captain. He smiled as he walked, past passengers lining up for flights. Some were yawning, some sipping coffee, and others scrolling quickly on their phones. For Marcus, these sights were ordinary, but he never took them for granted. Every passenger had a story. Some were traveling for joy, others for work, and some for emotional reunions. It was always his responsibility to take them safely from one place to another. As he approached the boarding gate of his scheduled flight, Marcus noticed something unusual. The gate agent, a young man in his 20s, was standing stiffly with his arms crossed. His eyes followed Marcus carefully, almost suspiciously, as if Marcus didn't belong there. Marcus offered a polite smile and said in his calm, professional voice, "Good morning. I'm here for Flight 482 to Dallas." But instead of welcoming him or checking his credentials, the gate agent raised an eyebrow and smirked slightly. "Sorry, sir, this is for crew only. Passengers wait on the other side." Marcus blinked, a little surprised but still gentle in tone. "I am the crew," he explained patiently. "I'm Captain Daniels. I'll be flying this aircraft." He lifted his badge slightly to make it visible. The agent gave him a quick glance and shook his head. "Nice try, sir. Crew members already went inside. Please step back." For a moment, Marcus thought he had misheard. He wasn't used to being challenged about his role. Usually, once he introduced himself, people treated him with courtesy. Yet here he was, a captain in full uniform, standing at his own gate and being told he didn't belong. He kept his composure. "I believe there may be a misunderstanding," he said softly, offering his identification card with a steady hand. "This flight cannot leave without me." But the agent didn't even bother to look at the card. Instead, he chuckled and muttered, loud enough for others in line to hear, "Sir, you don't look like a captain. Let's not waste time." Marcus felt the words sink in. They weren't just dismissive. They carried a tone of disbelief, as if the very idea of him being in command of an aircraft was impossible. A few passengers nearby turned their heads, curious about the tension. Some frowned, sensing the disrespect in the agent's words. Still, Marcus did not raise his voice. He had faced challenges in his life before, and he knew the power of patience. He placed his bag gently by his side and said, "I assure you, I am the captain of this flight. The safety of everyone depends on me being on board. Please check with your supervisor if you're uncertain." The agent rolled his eyes, clearly uninterested. "Sir, I told you, step back. We don't have time for jokes." Marcus stood quietly, his hands resting calmly in front of him. But inside, he was battling a swirl of emotions. There was disbelief that his professionalism was being questioned, frustration that his credentials weren't even considered, and sadness that his years of service meant nothing to the man standing before him. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in his ears. Flight 482 was scheduled to depart soon. Every minute wasted here could lead to delays, confusion for passengers, and unnecessary chaos. Marcus knew he couldn't afford to lose time, but he also knew losing his calm would only make things worse. Passengers behind him began whispering. "Isn't he wearing a pilot's uniform?" one woman murmured. Another man frowned and said, "Why won't they let him through?" The atmosphere shifted. What had started as a simple exchange now felt like a scene everyone was invested in. Some passengers looked irritated at the delay, but others looked more disturbed at the unfairness of what they were witnessing. Marcus took a slow breath, remembering his training. Pilots were taught to handle turbulence, not only in the skies, but also in life. This was turbulence of a different kind, social, emotional, and deeply personal. But just like in the air, he knew the key was control. So he stood firm, his posture straight, his voice calm, and his dignity intact. "Sir," he said once more with unshaken confidence, "I am not asking for favors. I am simply asking you to do your duty and verify my identity. If I am wrong, your supervisor will confirm. But if I am right, then you are delaying this flight unnecessarily." The young agent smirked again, but this time looked slightly uncomfortable. The murmurs from the passengers were growing louder. A small crowd was forming. Everyone was watching, and the pressure was mounting. Marcus did not move. He did not argue. He simply waited, firm, composed, and unbreakable. He knew truth was on his side, and sooner or later the truth always revealed itself. And just like turbulence before a calm sky, Marcus had a quiet feeling inside him that this storm would pass too, though he could never have imagined how quickly and how powerfully karma was about to turn the tide. The gate area grew quieter as more passengers realized something unusual was happening. People who had been scrolling on their phones now lifted their heads. Parents holding children paused mid-conversation. A few even removed their earbuds to listen. The sight of a uniformed pilot being stopped outside his own plane was not something they saw every day. Captain Marcus Daniels remained calm, but inside he felt a deep sting. He had worked for years to earn the title of captain, to sit in the left seat of an aircraft, to command respect. Yet here he stood, being laughed at, doubted, and blocked from entering the very place where he belonged. The young gate agent crossed his arms, his face filled with arrogance. "Sir," he said louder this time, making sure everyone could hear, "I already told you, this is a restricted area. Passengers do not belong here. If you cause trouble, I'll have to call security." The words hit like an insult, but Marcus didn't allow them to shake him. His training had always emphasized patience and professionalism, even in the face of misunderstanding. He kept his voice even. "I'm not causing trouble," Marcus replied, his eyes steady. "I am the captain of Flight 482. Look at my uniform, my badge, and my airline identification card. Please do your job and confirm with your system. You will see my name listed." But the agent only shook his head. "You can say anything you want, sir. That doesn't make it true." He chuckled again, dismissing Marcus's words as though they were nothing but a lie. A ripple of discomfort spread among the passengers. Some looked annoyed that their flight might be delayed. Others looked disturbed at the way Marcus was being treated. Whispers moved quickly through the crowd. "Why won't he just check the ID?" one man muttered. "He's clearly a pilot. Look at his uniform," another passenger whispered back. "This doesn't feel right," said a woman, shaking her head. Marcus noticed the whispers, but he didn't lean on them for support. He had always believed that dignity came from within, not from the approval of strangers. Still, it was reassuring to know that others were beginning to see the unfairness of the situation. The gate agent, however, was unmoved. He seemed to enjoy the small authority he held at that moment, and he wanted to make Marcus feel like an outsider. "You don't look like a captain to me," the agent said coldly. The words hung heavy in the air. Marcus's heart sank. He knew exactly what those words implied. It wasn't about his badge. It wasn't about his uniform. It was about him, the way he looked, the way he didn't fit the narrow picture the agent carried in his mind of what a captain should look like. But Marcus refused to let bitterness show. He stood tall, his expression steady. "What does a captain look like to you?" he asked calmly, not in anger but in quiet strength. The agent didn't answer. Instead, he waved his hand dismissively, trying to move on to the next passenger in line. Marcus stayed where he was. He knew walking away would mean surrendering, and he couldn't let that happen. The entire flight depended on him, and the passengers deserved a safe journey. "I'm not asking you to take my word for it," Marcus said evenly. "All I'm asking is that you verify my credentials. If you are right, then I will step aside. But if I am right, then you are delaying not just me, but every single person waiting here." The whispers among passengers grew louder. People were beginning to take Marcus's side openly. A middle-aged man in a business suit muttered, "He's the captain, clearly. Why waste time?" A mother carrying a toddler added softly, "I've flown with him before. I remember his voice." The agent's face tightened. He shifted uncomfortably, but still refused to give in. His pride seemed bigger than the truth. "Sir, I don't have time for this. Please leave before I call someone." The tension grew. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him, but he didn't let his frustration rise. He had flown through storms darker than this, with lightning striking outside his cockpit and engines roaring in turbulence. If he could keep calm thousands of feet in the air, he could certainly remain calm here. But deep inside, he felt something heavier than frustration. He felt sadness. Sadness that, even in his uniform, with his title and his years of service, he was still being judged by appearance. Sadness that his professionalism was invisible to someone blinded by assumption. He bent down slowly, picked up his airline bag, and stood straighter than before. His voice, though quiet, carried the weight of authority. "I am not leaving. This plane does not leave without its captain. If you doubt me, call your supervisor. I will wait right here until the truth is confirmed." Passengers nodded, some even whispering words of support. One woman leaned toward her husband and said, "This isn't right. Someone should speak up." And then, almost as if the moment had been waiting for her, an elderly woman stepped forward. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small handbag. Her silver hair was neatly tied back and her eyes sparkled with recognition. "I know. This man," she said firmly, pointing to Marcus. "He's telling the truth." The gate agent blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me, ma'am?" The woman smiled warmly at Marcus, then turned to the growing crowd. "Captain Daniels flew me home last Christmas. I remember his voice, his kindness, and how safe I felt on that flight. This man is not lying. He is the captain." Her voice carried authority, the kind that comes from age and sincerity. The passengers murmured in agreement. The crowd that had once been silent was now leaning in closer, their loyalty shifting clearly toward Marcus. Marcus's heart warmed. He gave the woman a respectful nod. "Thank you, ma'am." The gate agent, however, looked rattled. For the first time, his confidence wavered. His arrogance began to shrink as more passengers started questioning him aloud. The truth was starting to surface, and Marcus could sense it. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. This unfair obstacle could not stand much longer. The clock above the gate ticked loudly, its hands moving closer to departure time. Flight 482 was scheduled to leave in less than 15 minutes, and every second Marcus Daniels stood outside the gate, the pressure grew heavier. Passengers began to glance nervously at their watches. Some checked their boarding passes again, whispering to each other in low voices. A few sighed with frustration, worried about missing connections. The tension in the air was no longer just about the argument. At the gate, it was about the entire flight hanging in the balance. Marcus, however, stood tall. His uniform was spotless, his shoes shining, his badge visible. Everything about him reflected professionalism. Yet the one person who had the power to let him through, the young gate agent, refused to acknowledge it. "Sir," Marcus said once. Again, his voice steady but firm. "The passengers waiting here, the crew already on board, and the schedule itself all depend on me entering that gate." I have shown you my identification. I have explained who I am. Please do the responsible thing. Verify my credentials." But the gate agent still shook his head, his pride too thick to let reason in. "Sir, I already told you, the pilots are inside. I saw them go through earlier. Stop wasting time." Marcus took a deep breath. He knew those pilots the agent saw were the first officers, not the captain. Pilots always worked in teams, and the flight could not leave without the one person in command, the captain. Without him, the plane would remain grounded. He thought carefully about his next words. He did not want to create panic among passengers, but he also knew the truth had to be clear. "If you do not allow me through," he said calmly, "this flight will not leave the gate. The plane cannot take off without its captain. That captain is me." The whispers in the crowd grew louder. A businessman frowned. "Wait a second. If he really is the captain, and this flight doesn't leave because of this delay, then all of us are stuck?" Another woman, holding her phone tightly, muttered, "This is ridiculous. Why won't they just check his ID?" The agent's jaw tightened, but he still refused to admit his mistake. Instead, he crossed his arms again and said sharply, "Sir, I'm warning you for the last time. Step back." Marcus didn't flinch. His years of training as a pilot had taught him how to handle turbulence, both in the air and in life. He knew that staying calm under pressure was more powerful than raising his voice. "I'm not stepping back," he replied evenly. "I am doing my duty. And right now, my duty is making sure this flight departs safely." For a moment, the two men stood in silence, the ticking clock filling the air. The passengers could feel the weight of the standoff. They weren't just watching anymore. They were part of it. Their flight, their schedules, their entire day, all depended on the truth being revealed. Marcus decided to try one more time. He reached into his airline bag and pulled out a folder with his flight documents. He opened it carefully and showed the cover page that clearly listed his name, Captain Marcus Daniels, Flight 482. "Look," he said, his voice still calm but now carrying a note of urgency. "Here is the official flight plan. My name is right here. This document is required for the flight. Without me, this plan is useless. Without me, this plane is not moving." Some passengers leaned closer, nodding. They could see the truth in black and white. The whispers turned into louder comments. "He has the documents. Why won't the agent even check? This is wasting everyone's time. I have a connecting flight. I can't miss it because someone refuses to listen." The gate agent shifted uncomfortably. The confidence he had earlier was beginning to crumble, but his pride still wouldn't let him admit fault. He waved his hand and muttered, "Anyone can print papers. Doesn't prove anything." That response only angered the passengers more. People were no longer whispering. They were openly questioning the agent. "Are you serious? He has the badge, the uniform, and the documents. This is unbelievable. We're all going to be delayed because of this nonsense." The crowd's growing frustration made the atmosphere even heavier. Every minute lost meant tighter connections, missed meetings, and anxious travelers. People started looking at the clock, their eyes darting between Marcus, the agent, and the boarding gate. Marcus, though, remained steady. He knew the truth was on his side. He knew that sooner or later, reason would prevail. But he also knew the ticking clock meant the situation couldn't drag on much longer. He adjusted his uniform slightly, lifted his chin, and addressed the crowd, not in anger, but in calm reassurance. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this delay. Please know that your safety is my top priority. I promise you, once I am on board, I will make sure this flight departs as smoothly as possible. I thank you for your patience." The passengers nodded, some even clapping softly. His words gave them confidence, even in the middle of uncertainty. They could see his professionalism. They could feel his sincerity. The gate agent, however, looked smaller now, his authority slipping away as the passengers began siding with Marcus. Yet still he didn't step aside. His silence, His stubbornness and his refusal to admit fault kept the standoff alive. Marcus glanced once more at the ticking clock. 10 minutes left until departure. The air was thick with tension. Every passenger was waiting, watching, wondering how long this unfair delay would continue. Inside, Marcus knew the truth would come out soon. He could feel it, the weight of time. The pressure of the passengers and the undeniable facts were all against the gate agent. It was only a matter of moments before the situation reached a breaking point. And as the seconds slipped away, Marcus remained calm, standing tall with dignity, silently promising himself that he would not give in to frustration. He would hold, steady, because a true captain never loses composure, no matter how rough the turbulence becomes. The murmurs of passengers had grown louder, spreading like a wave through the waiting area. Some tapped their watches nervously. Others folded their arms, clearly frustrated. Yet amidst all the tension, one person's eyes stayed fixed on Marcus Daniels, an elderly woman seated near the gate. She had been waiting patiently for her own flight when the situation unfolded, and as she observed Marcus being dismissed and doubted, she felt a strong sense of recognition. She knew him. She had flown with him before. She remembered the calm in his voice, the gentle guidance through turbulence, the way he had ensured everyone felt safe. And now, seeing him questioned, ignored, and treated unfairly, she felt compelled to act. Standing slowly, she brushed her silver hair back and walked toward the front of the crowd. Her steps were careful, measured, yet full of determination. The passengers watched her approach, curious about what she would do. "I know this man," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the area. "He is not lying. He is Captain Marcus Daniels. I flew with him last Christmas, and I remember exactly how professional, kind, and careful he was. He is a true captain, and he belongs here." The gate agent froze, blinking in surprise. The crowd had begun to shift their attention toward her, and some passengers even leaned forward, nodding in agreement. The woman's confidence seemed to pierce through the tension, challenging the arrogance of the young agent. Marcus's face softened into a small, grateful smile. He nodded politely at her, acknowledging her courage. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice calm yet warm. The woman ignored the agent and continued, speaking now to the passengers as much as to him. "Everyone here deserves to know the truth. This man is our captain, and he has been delayed unfairly. Please, do not be misled by appearances. Look at his uniform, look at his badge, look at the papers he holds. He is telling the truth." Whispers turned into murmurs of agreement. A man in a business suit shook his head. "Finally, someone says it out loud." A young mother with her child added, "I felt something was wrong. Thank you for speaking up." The atmosphere shifted. What had begun as a confrontation between two individuals became a shared experience among everyone present. The passengers were no longer passive observers. They were witnesses. They had seen Marcus's calm demeanor, his professionalism, and now they had someone with authority vouching for him. The gate agent, sensing the tide turning, looked uneasy. His hands tightened into fists at his sides, but he didn't speak. His earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by an awkward tension. He glanced nervously at the growing crowd and then back at Marcus. Marcus remained composed. He knew the situation was changing in his favor, but he didn't want to escalate it further. "Ma'am, if you would," he said gently, "thank you for your support. It is appreciated. But this matter must still be verified officially." The elderly woman nodded. "Of course. I understand, Captain. But sometimes seeing the truth with your own eyes is as important as seeing it on paper. People here can see your honesty. That matters too." Passengers nodded, some clapping softly, not loudly enough to create a scene, but enough to signal support. The murmurs of approval grew, and the atmosphere in the gate area became one of solidarity. The crowd's energy was calm but firm. Everyone now wanted justice for the captain who had been delayed for no reason. Marcus looked at the agent again. "I've shown my badge, my uniform, and my flight documents. You can verify them at your system right now. This flight cannot depart without me. If you refuse to do your duty, every person waiting here will be delayed. And I cannot let that happen." The agent's face was pale now. He knew the truth was undeniable. The documents, the badge, the uniform, and now the elderly woman's testimony, all of it pointed to Marcus being exactly who he said he was. He had been stubborn, clinging to his own assumptions, and the pressure from passengers made it impossible to ignore. "Fine," he said at last, his voice tight. I'll check." The crowd's attention snapped toward him, even a few. Passengers let out quiet sighs of relief, sensing that the situation might finally resolve. The elderly woman smiled gently at Marcus, giving him a small nod of reassurance. Marcus handed the gate agent his flight documents once again, staying calm as the agent finally opened the system on the counter. His fingers moved over the keyboard, checking flight lists, employee IDs, and schedules, and minutes passed. But in those minutes, Marcus's calmness seemed to radiate through the crowd. Some passengers whispered, "He's been so patient." Others said, "Finally, someone can see the truth." Finally, the agent paused, stared at the screen, and then looked at Marcus. The color returned to his face, but it was accompanied by embarrassment. "Captain Daniels, you're right," he said quietly, almost under his breath. The crowd collectively held its breath. Marcus's calm face remained serene. He gave a polite nod. "Thank you. That is all I asked." The agent stepped aside, muttering quietly about checking procedures and rules. Marcus, dignified as ever, walked forward toward the boarding gate. Passengers watched him, some offering quiet nods, others clapping softly as he passed. The elderly woman followed at a short distance, smiling proudly at the captain she had defended. Marcus stopped for a moment, looked back at the passengers, and gave a brief nod. His expression conveyed respect, gratitude, and calm authority. "Thank you all for your patience," he said, his voice carrying over the boarding area. "We will depart safely and soon." Passengers smiled and whispered to each other, some commenting on his professionalism, others admiring his patience. The tension that had filled the gate area minutes ago had now been replaced by relief and admiration. Marcus finally stepped through the gate and toward the plane. Every step he took felt like a small victory, not just for him, but for fairness, patience, and truth. The elderly woman stayed behind momentarily, watching him, and then returned to her seat with a satisfied smile. The standoff was over. The truth had prevailed, and Marcus Daniels, the rightful captain, was on his way to lead the flight safely into the skies. The airport terminal had grown lively with tension, yet Marcus Daniels remained calm, his posture steady, his eyes alert. The murmurs of passengers, once filled with confusion, had now shifted to quiet murmurs of support. The elderly woman's words had tipped the balance in his favor, but Marcus knew the situation was not yet fully resolved. From behind the crowd, the sound of quick footsteps echoed through the gate area. The gate agent, still pale and uncertain, turned toward the noise. Moments later, a man in a crisp suit appeared, an airline manager moving with purposeful authority. His name tag read, "Mr. Harrison," and he carried a tablet in his hand. The crowd instinctively quieted as he approached. "Excuse me," Mr. Harrison said, his voice calm but commanding. "I've been informed there's a problem at this gate. Can someone explain what is happening?" The gate agent hesitated, clearly nervous under the manager's presence. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by awkwardness and guilt. He swallowed hard. "Sir, it's just, there was a misunderstanding. I thought—" Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow, signaling him to be precise. The gate agent shuffled papers in his hands, but he struggled to form a coherent explanation. The passengers watched quietly, sensing that the moment of truth had arrived. The elderly woman spoke up first. "Sir, this man, Captain Marcus Daniels, was being blocked from boarding his own flight." The gate agent refused to recognize him as the captain, even when he showed his uniform, badge, and official flight documents. Marcus, standing beside her, nodded slightly. "I did not wish to escalate the situation, sir. I only asked that my credentials be verified and that I be allowed to perform my duty. This flight cannot depart without its captain." Mr. Harrison's gaze shifted to Marcus, scanning his uniform, his badge, and then the documents in his hand. He turned back to the gate agent with a serious expression. "Is this true?" he asked firmly. The gate agent, caught in the presence of authority and now a growing crowd of witnesses, stammered. I thought he didn't look like a captain." "Didn't look like a captain," Mr. Harrison repeated, his voice rising slightly, filled with disbelief. He turned toward the passengers. "Everyone here heard that?" Many nodded, murmuring their agreement. The air was thick with tension, but now it was mixed with relief that the truth was emerging. Mr. Harrison shook his head slowly, his expression a mix of disappointment and stern professionalism. "Sir," he said to the gate agent, "you had one simple duty, to verify credentials. That is your job. Personal assumptions, prejudices, or opinions have no place in your work. You failed." The gate agent lowered his eyes, clearly ashamed. The arrogance and smirk that had been so visible earlier were now replaced by guilt. He nodded mutely, speechless under the weight of his error. Mr. Harrison turned to Marcus and the passengers. "Captain Daniels," he said, his tone sincere now, "I apologize for this inconvenience. The delay was caused entirely by a misunderstanding on our part. You have my assurance that it will be corrected immediately." Marcus inclined his head politely. "Thank you, sir. I only want to ensure the safety of our passengers and crew." The passengers, now fully aware of the situation, murmured in support. Some nodded at Marcus. Others smiled quietly, showing approval for the way he had handled the situation. The elderly woman returned to her seat with a satisfied expression, happy to have witnessed fairness and professionalism prevail. Mr. Harrison turned to the gate agent once more. "I will personally ensure that your actions are reviewed. This kind of mistake cannot happen again." The gate agent nodded, now fully aware of the consequences, his face pale but respectful. With the issue addressed, Marcus finally moved toward the boarding gate. His steps were confident, measured, and calm. Passengers gave him quiet nods of respect, some even clapping softly as he passed. He did not rush. He did not gloat. He simply walked with dignity toward the plane he was meant to command. As he approached the aircraft, the cabin crew stood ready, prepared for the flight. The first officer gave him a small nod. Marcus returned the gesture, acknowledging the team he would be working with for the next few hours. They all knew the importance of unity and calm, and they could sense the calm authority Marcus brought with him. The passengers began boarding soon after, reassured by Marcus's presence. The tension that had filled the gate area had dissipated, replaced with calm, anticipation, and respect. Everyone now felt confident that the flight would proceed safely and on time. Marcus entered the cockpit, settling into the captain's seat. He looked over the instruments, checking everything as usual, and felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The obstacles, the misunderstandings, the doubts, they were behind him now. His job was clear: to ensure a safe flight for every passenger. On board, the flight attendants prepared the cabin and passengers found their seats. Many glanced toward the cockpit door with admiration. They had just witnessed a moment of professionalism, patience, and dignity. Marcus's calm under pressure had not only ensured safety, but also commanded respect from everyone who had been watching. The gate agent, now reassigned under Mr. Harrison's supervision, watched from a distance, learning an important lesson about humility and responsibility. Marcus's conduct, combined with the courage of the elderly woman and the support of passengers, had exposed the truth clearly and without conflict. Marcus picked up the intercom and addressed the passengers for the first time that day. His voice was calm, warm, and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Thank you for your patience and understanding. We will depart shortly, and I promise you a safe and smooth journey. Welcome aboard Flight 482 to Dallas." Soft smiles appeared on many faces. People exchanged quiet nods, some murmuring words of appreciation. They had seen injustice confronted with dignity, arrogance replaced by truth, and fairness restored through calm professionalism. Marcus adjusted his headset and began final pre-flight checks. The plane hummed with energy, ready for takeoff. The sky beyond the runway was bright and clear, reflecting the calm determination he felt inside. He knew that the journey ahead would be smooth, not because there were no challenges, but because preparation, patience, and professionalism always created the path to success. And as the engines roared to life, Marcus Daniels felt a quiet satisfaction. The obstacles had been overcome. The truth had been revealed. The passengers were safe. The journey could finally begin. The moment Marcus Daniels settled into the cockpit, the atmosphere in the terminal shifted. The passengers who had gathered around the gate whispered excitedly to each other. They had just witnessed something rare: truth and professionalism prevailing over arrogance and prejudice. And now, as the gate agent stood awkwardly, the consequences of his behavior were beginning to unfold. The airline manager, Mr. Harrison, returned to the gate counter, his expression stern. "I'm going to have to take action regarding your conduct," he said directly to the young gate agent. "Your refusal to follow protocol and your assumptions caused unnecessary delay and stress to passengers. This is unacceptable." The agent swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how serious the situation had become. He looked around and noticed the crowd of passengers silently observing him, their expressions ranging from disappointment to disbelief. He realized for the first time that his actions had been seen clearly by everyone. "Sir, I just," he began. But the words faltered. He couldn't argue his way out. His arrogance, which had seemed so natural just minutes ago, had evaporated under the scrutiny of authority and witnesses alike. Mr. Harrison continued, his voice calm but firm. "You will be removed from your post immediately. You will undergo retraining on protocol, respect, and proper verification procedures. Any further incidents of this nature will result in more serious consequences. Do you understand?" The agent nodded quickly, unable to meet the eyes of the passengers or the captain. Humility replaced his earlier confidence. The humiliation was clear, and for once he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. It was a lesson he would not soon forget, a direct reminder that arrogance and prejudice have consequences, even when no one intends harm. Meanwhile, the passengers' attention slowly returned to Marcus. His calm demeanor, unshaken patience, and unwavering professionalism had turned a tense confrontation into a lesson in dignity. Mothers whispered to children, pointing out how important it is to stay calm and polite, even when others are unfair. Business travelers nodded in quiet respect, acknowledging the strength it takes to maintain composure under pressure. One young man spoke aloud, almost to himself. "I hope everyone sees that being professional, patient, and honest always wins." In the end, an elderly woman, not the same as the witness who had defended Marcus, added softly, "Yes. Sometimes it just takes courage to wait and trust that the truth will come forward." Marcus, now in the cockpit, could hear the murmurs and soft conversations, but he remained focused. He double-checked the instruments, reviewed the flight plan once more, and confirmed the positions of his crew. His mind, trained to anticipate challenges, was ready for the skies. But inside, he also felt a quiet satisfaction. The situation on the ground had been resolved, and justice had quietly taken its course. Back at the gate, the former agent was escorted to a different area by a supervisor. As he walked, he couldn't help but notice the disappointed faces of the passengers. The realization settled in fully. His actions had been wrong, and karma, in the form of accountability, had arrived swiftly. The elderly woman who had defended Marcus returned to her seat, smiling quietly. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes the truth is all it takes to set things right." She glanced at the boarding passengers, watching as they filed onto the plane with renewed confidence and calm, knowing their safety was in capable hands. Marcus made the final checks. His first officer nodded, ready to start taxiing once clearance was given. The engines purred as systems were confirmed, and a sense of calm authority filled the cockpit. Marcus's professionalism had turned a potentially chaotic situation into a smooth operation, and the passengers were unaware of just how close the delay had come. As the plane began moving toward the runway, the passengers settled into their seats. Some whispered quietly, sharing what they had witnessed. Many commented on Marcus's calm demeanor, noting how impressive it was to remain composed while being publicly doubted. Others were inspired, realizing that patience, professionalism, and integrity can overcome even the most frustrating obstacles. In the terminal, the airline staff had begun to take note. Supervisors quietly discussed what had happened, recognizing that Marcus's conduct was a model example for others. The gate agent, humbled by the experience, listened silently as retraining plans were mentioned. He had learned a lesson he would not soon forget. Assumptions, prejudice, and stubbornness may feel powerful, but they can be overturned in moments, leaving only accountability behind. As Flight 482 lifted off the runway, Marcus felt the familiar sense of purpose he always did when airborne. The sky was bright, clear, and welcoming. Below, the city faded into the distance, but the lessons learned that morning stayed vividly in his mind. Humility, patience, courage, and respect. These were qualities that mattered not just in the cockpit, but in every corner of life. Back on the ground, passengers glanced at each other, smiling quietly. They had not only witnessed a flight about to depart, but had observed integrity and professionalism in action. Some passengers silently vowed to remember the lesson, never judge by appearances, and always recognize the value of patience, calm, and truth. In the distance, the former gate agent returned to his office, his face thoughtful. He knew that the humiliation he had experienced was deserved. He had learned that his actions had consequences, that arrogance could not hide the truth, and that accountability sometimes comes swiftly and unexpectedly. Meanwhile, Marcus Daniels remained in his cockpit, guiding the aircraft steadily into the sky. Calm, focused, and dignified, he reflected on the events of the morning. It had been more than just a delay. It had been a lesson in human behavior, patience, and justice. And the reward for his professionalism wasn't just a cleared path to the cockpit. It was the knowledge that fairness and truth had prevailed. The passengers, safely aboard, looked out the windows as the city grew smaller below. Some whispered about what had happened. Others quietly reflected on the importance of calmness, patience, and integrity. And in every seat, a shared sense of relief and admiration settled in. High above the clouds, Marcus Daniels adjusted the controls, his eyes focused on the horizon. The plane glided smoothly, engines steady, passengers calm. The turbulence of the morning was far behind him now, and the reward for his patience, courage, and professionalism was unfolding in real time. a safe, steady flight, and the knowledge that truth had finally won. Even the young gate agent, removed from the scene, would remember this day for the rest of his career, a reminder that arrogance, prejudice, and impatience have consequences, and that karma often arrives quickly and justly. The hum of the engines filled the cabin as Flight 482 climbed steadily into the sky. Captain Marcus Daniels sat in the cockpit, hands steady on the controls, eyes focused on the horizon. Outside, the city below shrank into a patchwork of streets and buildings, while clouds stretched far and wide across the morning sky. It was a familiar sight, yet today it carried a different feeling, a sense of quiet victory, of calm after a storm. The passengers, settled into their seats, were beginning to relax. The tension from the earlier delay had faded, replaced by a sense of trust and admiration. They knew they were in capable hands, but some still whispered among themselves about what had happened at the gate. The story of patience, professionalism, and truth unfolding before their eyes had left a deep impression. Marcus adjusted his headset and cleared his throat gently. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm, warm, and confident. "This is your captain speaking. First, I want to thank you for your patience and understanding this morning. We had an unexpected delay at the gate, and I appreciate your composure while it was being resolved." The passengers listened intently, some nodding, others offering quiet smiles. His voice carried more than just information. It carried calm, authority, and reassurance. "I also want to acknowledge the importance of patience and trust," Marcus continued. "This morning, I was delayed for reasons beyond my control. But thanks to the courage of those who spoke up and the awareness of those around us, the situation was resolved. It reminded me, and hopefully all of us, that fairness and respect are always worth holding on to." A soft murmur of agreement spread through the cabin. Some passengers looked at one another, silently reflecting on how a moment of injustice had turned into a lesson in integrity. Children, curious, listened closely as parents quietly explained that calmness and honesty can solve even difficult problems. Marcus's voice softened as he added, "Flying is not just about moving from one place to another. It is about trust, responsibility, and care for the people on board. Every passenger, every crew member, every individual depends on these values for a safe journey. Today, those values were tested, and they prevailed." He paused, giving a quiet moment for the passengers to absorb his words. The airplane hummed steadily, cruising above the clouds, smooth and steady. Below, the city was now invisible beneath a blanket of mist, while sunlight glimmered off the distant horizon. It was a perfect view, a visual reminder that even after turbulence, the sky always clears. "Throughout my career," Marcus continued, "I have faced many challenges, storms in the air, emergencies, delays, but I have learned that how we respond matters more than what happens. Calmness, respect, honesty, and patience. These qualities guide every decision I make in the cockpit and beyond. I hope that today's events remind us all of the power of these principles." Passengers glanced at each other, some whispering. Quietly, "He handled it so well, and I've never seen a captain like this before." The appreciation in their eyes was visible, and Marcus's calm authority had clearly left an impression. The elderly woman, who had spoken up earlier to defend Marcus, smiled quietly from her seat. She had been right. Her small act of courage had helped bring fairness and truth to light. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, watching the captain guide the plane safely and calmly. Marcus's first officer glanced at him, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The teamwork in the cockpit was seamless, built on trust and professionalism. Together, they monitored instruments, communicated with air traffic control, and ensured that every system was operating perfectly. The earlier morning's chaos seemed like a distant memory, replaced by focus, calm, and purpose. The passengers, now fully settled, began to relax further. Some looked out of the windows, marveling at the scenery. The rolling clouds, the clear blue sky, and the rising sun created a scene of quiet beauty. It was as if the sky itself was celebrating the calm that Marcus had restored, both in the air and on the ground. Marcus spoke again over the intercom, his tone gentle and reassuring. "We are cruising smoothly at our designated altitude. Weather conditions are excellent, and we expect an on-time arrival. Thank you for trusting us with your journey. Your safety, comfort, and peace of mind are always my top priorities." A soft round of applause rippled through the cabin, not loud, but heartfelt. Passengers exchanged smiles, acknowledging the captain who had turned an embarrassing and unfair delay into a lesson in patience, fairness, and professionalism. Marcus allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Moments like these were the reward for a career built on integrity. He had faced prejudice, arrogance, and misunderstanding, yet he had remained calm, respectful, and unwavering. And now, the outcome was clear. Truth, patience, and professionalism had won. As the plane flew steadily toward Dallas, the mood in the cabin was calm, reflective, and inspired. People whispered to each other about the morning's events, recognizing that sometimes ordinary moments become extraordinary lessons. They had seen courage, not in confrontation, but in calmness, patience, and integrity. Marcus glanced at the instruments one final time before turning slightly toward his co-pilot. "Ready for descent when clearance comes," he said. His voice was confident, measured, and steady. The first officer nodded. "All set, Captain." The sun continued to rise higher in the sky, illuminating the horizon and casting a warm glow over the passengers. Each person felt a sense of relief, pride, and calm. The turbulence of the morning was gone, replaced by the smooth glide of the aircraft and the reassurance of skilled hands guiding them safely. Marcus Daniels, sitting in the cockpit, reflected quietly. Today had been more than a flight. It had been a reminder of human values: patience over anger, truth over prejudice, calm over chaos. Every challenge, he realized, was an opportunity to demonstrate integrity, professionalism, and dignity. And as Flight 482 approached its destination, passengers readied themselves for landing. Some whispered a final word of thanks to the crew. Others simply looked out the windows at the approaching city below. All shared the unspoken appreciation for a captain who had not only flown them safely, but had also taught an unforgettable lesson. The plane descended smoothly, wheels touching the runway with a gentle, precise landing. Applause broke out from the passengers, not just for the safe arrival, but for the journey that had been guided with calm, dignity, and integrity. Marcus allowed a quiet smile to cross his face. The flight had been more than just a trip. It had been a statement of what professionalism, patience, and truth can achieve. As the passengers disembarked, some approached the cockpit door, offering words of gratitude and respect. Marcus nodded to each, his demeanor calm and warm. He knew that today, in every small gesture and decision, he had turned a moment of unfairness into a story of justice, patience, and human decency. And as the sun glinted off the wings of Flight 482, Marcus Daniels prepared for his next journey, confident that no matter what challenges came next, truth and professionalism would always guide the way.